Telecom.com Google Hangout on the spectrum auctions. Uh, welcome to Mr. Rajan Mathews, the Director
Thank you.
General at Telecom Operators Association of India, as well as Mr. Deepak Kumar, the founder analyst at Business Market. We are here for the auctions to talk about the auctions and the after effect of the auction on the industry, on the consumers. It's an interesting period where today it said there is a Supreme Court judgment about the auctions being allowed to go forward, but the decision or the rulings cannot be the final decision of the auctions cannot be made till the final hearing is out. So these are interesting times and eagerly awaiting the auction. So we'll turn over to Mr. Mathews for his opening remarks, and then Mr. Deepak will take it forward from there. Yes, Mr. Mathews.
Thank you, Romit. Very clearly, with the Supreme Court ruling today, there's been a fair degree of uncertainty injected into the process. The question is, will this impact the bidding scenarios or the tactics or the grand strategy of the operators? We don't believe so. So we believe that there will still be relatively active bidding, rather keen bidding in the 900 megahertz, and then we'll wait to see how that flips over to the 21 megahertz. And of course, 800 megahertz is much more limited in terms of its demand. So clearly, 900 and 2100 are going to be the key playing grounds. 1800 will be relatively muted only because there's really no contiguous bands available anymore. It's really a question of picking up some backfill or single spots for individual operators to perhaps augment their voice capacity in certain areas. So again, the fact that there was no clarity on spectrum trading and spectrum sharing also injects a further degree of uncertainty into the whole outcomes again. So we will just have to wait and see how these auctions progress, and then wait for the Honorable Supreme Court to weigh in when the final results are out.
Deepak, would you want to take over from here and ask Mr. Mathews a question?
Yeah, sure. So, Ms. Mathews, I thought, so till the clarity emerges, we cannot say too much about this aspect. But I thought we can take this opportunity to discuss a few other related aspects, and something related to the pricing. Operators have been talking about, that before the spectrum auction process started also, there have been voices that the pricing is very, very high. The reserve pricing is higher than they should have been, right? So that is happening on one side. On the other side, what we have also seen that there is a huge amount of deposit, probably a very record amount of deposit that has happened in terms of earnest money. Okay. So you see there is some kind of contradiction in terms of what the industry is talking about high pricing vis-a-vis when it comes to actually participation, then there is a very aggressive approach that has witnessed. So do you think that is kind of a contradiction, or do you think just like you remember the 3D options when it first happened, and there was probably overbidding and irrational behavior. You can even say to an extent that was seen there in terms of the thing. Do you think operators are getting impulsive this time? Once again, I'm just going to do certain fallouts when even all the operators have their balance sheets are very highly leveraged. They are having a huge amount of debt. What do you see that is happening out there?
So first of all, we don't see this as a contradiction, but more of an anomaly, given the dynamics that are at play in the present situation. and I believe that has been very clearly highlighted by TRAI, which pointed out the severe anomalies in the present structure of the situation and the failure to address those anomalies has really what has given rise to this forced bidding, if you will, where the anomaly of high prices comes in. So yes, when you start off with us saying, look, reserve price ought to be at a reasonable level to encourage larger participants, encourage a much more robust bidding, if you will, by ensuring that all those who are interested can have a fair start to the game. All right, that's the reason why you have a reserve price, and it's to ensure that the government has a reasonable return on the assets that are being sold. Okay, when you start from that premise and then you artificially increase it, what you've actually done is to reduce the number of players that can participate, as you rightly point out. That's exactly what has happened. Maybe there would have been more, but that was the original intent, if you will, of the reserve price. So now when you look at the rest, by virtue of the fact that you've increased the reserve price, that you've limited the amount of spectrum, you then force these operators whose operations are at risk, what we call business continuity, that confluence of issues and events automatically leads to what we would call irrational bidding and interest in spectrum that was highlighted by TRAI.
So would you say that then there is somewhere fundamentally it is against the principle of telecom inclusion, broadband for all, and those kind of things that we have been talking about all along?
Yeah, we believe so, because first of all, we are very much in support of the Honorable Prime Minister's vision and programs that have been laid out. By the way, they are an extension of NTP 2012. So there's nothing new principally except the emphasis that is being led by the Honorable Prime Minister and the support that he has extended to that. So when you ask for broadband for all, when you ask for connectivity to the gram panchayats, when you talk about smart cities, when you talk about affordability, on the other hand, when you look at these key ingredient and input for the delivery of those services, and you constrain the quantum of it artificially, and you escalate the price of it to stratospheric levels, then you must expect that that is in some sense going to mitigate against these objectives that you put up of broadband for all, go to the gram panchayats, give affordability, start smart cities, a smart handset in every hand. All of this appears to be at odds going forward.
Yeah, very true. Because if you talk about the Digital India program, for example, which is a kind of an umbrella program, and as you pointed out, there are a whole lot of other sub-programs that are that larger ambit. So without a very holistic industry participation, it is probably in a vast country like India, right, and a very complex and diverse demographic that we have in India, it probably becomes very, very difficult for anybody, even if it is government alone, to take it, achieve the goals, the very objectives and tenets that have been put forward, right? So when we are kind of seeing these kind of contradictions or anomalies that we are talking about in terms of making the spectrum available through the industry to as large populace as possible across the country. So that is somewhere fundamentally starts limiting the potential that can be achieved. I mean, so
yeah, I think Deepak, your point is well made, and I believe it needs to be contextualized, as you rightly point out, in the Indian context. And what I mean by that is that when you look at these programs we talked about, e-governance, e-health, rural penetration, affordability, broadband, all of these requirements, please understand that in India, we have a single network, which is the mobile network, on which network all of this demand has to ride. You look at other countries of the world, especially the developed countries of the world, they have at least 5 networks on which this demand is spread. So you have a very robust and highly penetrated landline. You have a relatively highly penetrated mobile network with very large bandwidth of spectrum. You have a cable network which affords two-way communication services and again has fiber connectivity. You have satellite, which also has relatively broadband capacity. And then, of course, you have the government's own secure networks. So you have at least 5 networks on which this demand is spread. In India, all of the demand is going to ultimately have to come over the mobile network, which is the last mile preference. That is why the government has talked about NoFan, which is the fiber network. But again, please remember, the fiber network is only a backhaul network. It doesn't address the front part on which the demand is going to come.
Right, the last mile. Yeah, very true. Because somewhere all these stakeholders have also agreed to the fact that probably for a country like India, where and also given the fact that the new mobile broadband network, the technologies are very, very evolved and can kind of, to a large extent, substitute for many other alternatives, like if not fiber, then many other fixed line alternatives. So therefore, it becomes all the more important to kind of keep pricing, the spectrum pricing, and even the availability of the spectrum, because ultimately it's the demand supply thing. So if you shorten the supply, then the demand increases, price increases, right? So all these are related aspects. It's important, probably fundamentally, to address those things. And what should you be doing as the industry, one of the leading industries? What role do you kind of see yourself doing going forward, and what do you think the government's response should be coming forth of?
So we believe there are at least 3 or 4 things that the government should be focusing on. One is very clearly, since we are the main network on which all the demand that we're talking about has to ride, then we have to ensure that adequate spectrum is being offered to the industry. So we should look at all the idle spectrum lying in the hands of various governmental agencies and other agencies, get them out and start putting them for commercial use. The second point is that we need to internationally harmonize the spectrum, because without international harmonization of the spectrum bands, it's difficult to get economies of scale on handsets and network equipment. So that's the second part of the equation. The third part of the equation is to basically say, okay, how do we ensure the financial health of the industry so that the industry can make investments not only for the spectrum but also in the network? And so therefore you need to revisit whether you still need to charge license fees, SUC charges, charges for penetrating the rural areas, the USOF fund charges. All of these are additional charges being levied. So is it time to remove this, because you've got your payment up front for a significant amount of things? So and again, those are at least 2 or 3 areas that the government can start focusing on right away. Is the other big thing that we have to look at, so that we can continue to install the towers and lay the fiber in all the states. Increasingly, we are facing a lot of pressure from the states, which have to give us the right of way, and we are running into problems, and so that is delaying the rollout of our network. So these are areas which the government has to focus on.
Yeah, but Mr. Mathews, these issues have been there for quite some time, right? And the industry has been talking about it, putting forth the logics that for quite some time. But not really anything substantial has happened so far. The new government has also been there, and this is the first major auction that is happening after the new government came in, right? Is still, we don't see a fundamental shift in the approach from the government side. Understandably, it is not one government or one individual or two individuals in the government that matter, but the system as a whole, right? So there has not been a fundamental shift in the way the system has approached the very fundamental goal of telecom inclusion, right? So what do you think can be done now to improve that? What has been there?
So I think I go back to the year 1999, 2000, Deepak, when the industry was almost in a similar situation, and we had the Honorable Prime Minister then, Mr. Vajpayee, take a very bold decision to put aside all of this prices that had been bid in a closed bidding auction process, which had brought the industry to its knees. Clearly, it was the fault of the bidding. We're not taking away the responsibility, but Mr. Vajpayee saw that this industry was not going anywhere. People were exiting the industry. Investments were not being made. He made a very bold decision to go to revenue share, which was rather a sort of a pioneering move. But the Honorable Prime Minister was bold to take that stand, and as they say, the rest is history. The industry really took off. I think that perhaps we need that type of leadership where the Honorable Prime Minister says, listen, my programs are at risk because of these issues. Let's take some bold action. Let's get the investments going again, and then all of these items will happen. So I think it's time to get out of the forest, if you were. Let's look at the main thing. Let's have the Honorable Prime Minister say, listen, this is what is necessary. This is the decisions we're going to take, and let's move forward on this basis, as happened with the past Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee.
Okay, so you are saying the political will or the leadership will is what is probably has been lacking all these years, and that needs to be coming forth.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Mr. Mathews, there is one more aspect to this whole, last mile availability kind of a thing. And we time and again we talk about the spectrum auctions, the reserve prices, the bidding, high prices, low prices. So there is much of focus on the licensed band of this spectrum, right? Whereas there is a huge amount of unlicensed band, which is probably the Wi-Fi band, right? Which is lying potentially not so much tapped. I mean, not the full potential of that spectrum has been realized. Do you think there is a need, or there is also a kind of it can complement the existing spectrum bands, and operators should be looking at it in terms of easing out the burden that they are facing out of the spectrum prices?
So clearly, when you look at network design, all of us recognize that there's really never going to be enough bandwidth available on the spectrum. So we have to use all available spectrum, both licensed and unlicensed. Again, our only contention is that when you are going to start earmarking certain parts of the spectrum for Wi-Fi type unlicensed activity, then let's just make sure that it is internationally harmonized. So presently, of course, you know that the 800 band, a part of the 800 band is what we are using for Wi-Fi, and also now we're looking at 4 or 5 gigahertz bands, somewhere between the 3 and 5 gigahertz bands for, again, unlicensed spectrum. So again, Wi-Fi tends to be smaller circles, so those bands can become effectively utilized. We're usually looking at in-building utilization. So they all, lend itself to that type of spectrum band. So we are all for making sure that happens, because we understand that we will need as much of capacity as available, and our operators themselves are putting up Wi-Fi hotspots all over the country. We are trying to work with the government to ensure that the Wi-Fi hotspots that they are putting up are properly sized and run. Obviously, there's got to be backhaul connectivity from those Wi-Fi spots. So we're working to ensure that we provide that backhaul connectivity. So I think, yes, to your point, this is necessary. We're working together on this, and increasingly we need to ensure that we're internationally harmonized on additional spots that we identify for Wi-Fi use.
Right. I'm sorry, Romit, do we have any audience questions that you would like
Yes,
to
we have some audience questions. Yes. So, one from a consumer point of view, there's always this question that the amount that the telecom operators put in, would the tariffs rise? Yeah, so the natural logical answer to that is yes. But in this case, what we've seen is that even in the previous auction, while there was necessity to rise, because of there still being competitive pressures, the amount of rise, or rather the amount of effective rise, hasn't been too much, maybe 2 to 3 paisa. How would you think it would pan out, Mr. Rajan, after the auctions, especially when there will be a new operator, a large player coming in, maybe later during the year?
So first of all, I think if you look at the shortened period, which say let's look at a 2 to 3 year time horizon, I think the competitive pressures, we have upwards of 8, 9 operators in a circle, that will ensure, the competitive pressures will ensure that the price rises will be dampened, although there will be significant economic rationale for the increase of the pricing. If we were to go on a pure economics cost in, input in, output basis of a model, yes, having paid these large amounts of money for the input, one would expect that the output would reflect that. Given the competitive pressures, that's the dampener on this. However, we all recognize that post the 2 and 3rd year, we're looking at data to be the new engine that drives it. So we're looking at cloud computing, we're looking for machine to machine. All of these things are really going to be picking up, if you will, the demand. So in India, we've always relied on high volume and low margin. So if the volume in these areas pick up significantly, if we can make the commensurate investments in our network, I believe that we will have a fair shot at controlling the upward price impetus, if you will, and we could perhaps do a good job of ensuring affordability. But the present scenario kind of mitigates against that. It's a 20-year license, so we're all hoping that we can somehow play the volume game in an appropriate way, that the upward pressure on prices will get mitigated, and that's principally what happened on the voice side.
Do you sense or do you fear that the industry might get sucked into a sort of a rate war, if I may call it, that we saw late 2009, 2010, because of the new player which comes in, and the already existing lower denominator operators who are there in the market? Would there be a lurking fear that we might get back to that scenario?
I guess that fear might always be there, but I think it's very limited because we expect that the players will be rational this time. On the last go around, I think the playing field was quite unlevel. You had folks with large resources, you had a burgeoning industry coming on, new players. So the cost structure was very different. Obviously, when you were getting spectrum for nominal prices versus others who are paying higher prices, between CDMA and GSM, those things skewed the landscape. Today, just about everybody is getting on the same platform in terms of spectrum pricing, SUC charges, license fees, although there's still some anomalies in there. By and large, the cost structure is kind of getting equalized. And if you know, the new players invariably are playing with higher bands of spectrum, which again pushes them into a higher cost structure. So given those issues, we expect that those folks will act rationally and want to expect a fair rate of return on their investment, which is not to say there won't be aggressive competition, but we don't expect the competition to be either ruinous or irrational.
Mhm. I'll just move away from the auctions for, okay, one additional thing I just needed to know, obviously this is a very scary scenario of some operators actually fighting for the rupees continue in some circles. I just wanted to understand a technical point. So if an operator X were to lose his spectrum in a particular circle, in a circle A, would he be able to get into a roaming agreement with an incumbent operator who's operating there to continue to add subscribers and service their own subscribers?
You cut out a little bit. Can you just repeat it? You asked that.
Yeah. So I'll just repeat it. So for instance, if an operator X loses his 900 megs in a particular circle and does not have a fallback, would he be able to get into a roaming agreement with somebody who's operating and on that agreement add and service their existing subscribers? Is that allowed?
Yeah, first of all, yes. If you look at the present law of the land, which allows intra-circle roaming, and since most of the spectrum is now acquired through auction, those types of arrangements are feasible, and we'll know more as we get into spectrum trading and sharing regulations further out. But yes, our opinion is that those would be allowed. And yes, if somebody does lose, say, 900 spectrum, yes, some of them have fallback 1800 in several of their circles. Obviously, they'll be looking at 2100. But yes, there will be some short-term pain as operators which lose and perhaps may not have adequate bandwidth to service the large number of subscribers. I would expect that there will be some challenges, and the severity of that will depend on the volume of subscribers that are there, the amount of bandwidth that was lost and has to be replaced, which is why the Supreme Court is looking very closely at the whole issue of business continuity. So we'll have to wait till the Supreme Court weighs in on that matter.
All right. All right. Just before the auctions start, a lot of operators individually have moved a lot of courts. Obviously, the Supreme Court has tried to tried to simulate that on its own day, on its own bench, and will be giving a ruling. Today, also, Vodafone has challenged at least some provisions of interconnect tariff regime, which tried a couple of years back. Is this a worrisome trend? Are we, spate of court cases, one after the other, challenging? So is that do you see that as at par for the course, or are these things which are increasingly throwing up a bit more of a confrontational nature between the industry and the government? Maybe because they are not on the same page, maybe because people are not listening.
So, in our opinion, the TRAI had given very clearly articulated, rational, integrated recommendations, which, if they had been adhered to and executed, would not have put us in the situation where we are, where there is injected into the situation a high degree of uncertainty as to outcomes. So this is where our disappointment was, insofar as the DOT, in its wisdom, chose to ignore many of the very good recommendations that came out of the TRAI and adopted certain other practices. For example, not putting up all of the 20 megahertz of 2100, gave no explanation, rather, in our opinion, a flimsy explanation that, oh, we have to dot some I's and cross some T's, when the defense itself wrote to the TRAI saying it's available for you. All right, yes, the fact that it would have been given to us later after the auction is nothing new. always spectrum was given much later. The fact that it was not in the possession of the DOT is, in our opinion, not a practical answer, because again, the 900 is not in the possession of the DOT, it's in the possession of the operators who hold it till November, but yet the auction's happening today. So again, as long as you have a clear path that sees how the outcome is, you could have put it up there. The TRAI gave very clear instructions as to what could have happened in terms of additional 1.2 megahertz of 900 coming online. It also said, please give a clear roadmap as to what future spectrum is going to come online. Please give an indication as to what you want to do with spectrum trading and sharing, so that bidders have a complete set of data on which they can make reasonable and rational bids. Unfortunately, those recommendations were not adopted.
On the specific point of the interconnect charges, I thought you did make a point that was quite a fair recommendation on the interconnect charges. But again, an operator has gone to court against it. Your views? Why would that? What is the problem there?
So again, it's an individual operator issue. In terms of the court, I think what was happening there was asking for clarification, because if you recollect, the Supreme Court had ruled that the TDSAT did not have jurisdiction to overrule TRAI when it came to tariff matters. All right. Now, previous to that, there were several cases in the Supreme Court which had this whole issue of interconnect charges. What should be the model? Should it be, incremental, charges? Should it be full costing? Should it include capital? Should it just include operating expenses? So these issues were before the Supreme Court, and the litigation, as we understand it, is really asking the court to clarify, in the light of its ruling, that TDSAT does not have jurisdiction over TRAI. Please clarify this qua our case that is before you, which you really haven't cleared off the text in the light of this ruling. So it's really a clarification, and so we'll wait again to see what the court has to say.
Interesting time, Mr. Mathews. Deepak, would you have any additional questions, or else we could let Mr. Mathews go, because these are very, very busy times for all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Deepak, do you have anything?
Yeah, one small question I would like to ask related to the discussion you were having towards the end with Mr. Mathews.
Sure.
Mr. Mathews, we talked about the roadmap aspect, right? As far as the spectrum is concerned. What kind? I think that was a very pertinent point that came up during the discussion, because a lot of things have been happening more like on an ad hoc kind of basis. Okay, this thing is ending, licenses are going to end in this year, so let's auction now. Okay, we'll put together some 4 megahertz, 5 megahertz spectrum and auction it. But there is no clear roadmap, not a strategic direction coming together from both industry and the government putting it together and saying, okay, this is the way we want to approach it. This is the ideal scenario, right? These are the ways in which the spectrum, if it is not available right now, it could be coming, okay, at this point of time, and therefore there can be an approach as far as other ministries who are holding the spectrum or other bodies who are holding the spectrum to give them enough time to plan out and do all kind of things. I mean, that is the kind of because the entire program around which this session is kind of woven up, right? It is dependent on, it is a strategic program, and the spectrum availability across different bands is a very, very fundamental aspect of making that possible. So, do you think that that should be there, and how it should be?
So again, Deepak, our point of view is that, listen, all countries have the same amount of spectrum, right? It's not as if one country has got a different set of spectrum bands other than the other. So there's no secret around the spectrum bands. The only question is, first of all, understanding, who's got these various chunks of spectrum, right? Is it space? How much does space have? So getting a very good inventory of where the spectrum is and who's using it and not using it, and what is the future course of action for the use of that spectrum by these entities. Now, for example, when we talk to defense, the defense basically said, when it comes to spectrum, we are more concerned about spectrum in the border areas, right? That same spectrum in the rest of the territory and in the heart of the country is not being used by the defense. So what sense does it make to hold on to it? That's an example of saying, look, is it feasible to pull this out? Now, for example, because the broadcasting industry has gone digitized, there's a whole chunk of spectrum that now becomes useful, right? So again, mobile TV, there's a whole lot of spectrum that's available there that's been earmarked. And internationally, that's increasingly being freed up for use by the mobile networks. So again, these are all developments that are happening. And so our point of view is, please give us a very clear roadmap in terms of saying, where's the inventory? In whose hands is it lying? How much can you free up reasonably over the next several years going ahead? And that gives the mobility networks clear understanding of how we should plan to go ahead.
Right, very true, very true. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mathews, for your time. Thank you so much, Deepak, for your time. Again, as we look forward to the auctions, should we just say that let the best man win? Thank you so much, both.
Thank you, Rajan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.